In the small, isolated town of Ravensbrook, a place shrouded in perpetual fog and whispers of the supernatural, there was an old legend about a woman dressed in white. Her story was one of betrayal, heartbreak, and untimely death, and it had been passed down through generations. The townspeople spoke of her in hushed tones, warning their children never to venture near the abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town, where she was said to wander. On a particularly gloomy evening, a group of friends, Daniel, Emily, Claire, and Jason, decided to test their courage and visit the mansion. The house, with its broken windows and overgrown garden, loomed like a dark sentinel against the sky, its silhouette jagged and foreboding. "Are you sure about this?" Emily asked, her voice trembling slightly as they approached the iron gate. It creaked ominously as Jason pushed it open. "It's just a story," Daniel replied, trying to sound confident. "There's no such thing as ghosts." The four of them crossed the threshold, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path that led to the front door. Claire, the most skeptical of the group, noticed a strange chill in the air and shivered involuntarily. The door swung open with an eerie ease, as if welcoming them inside. The interior was dark and cold, with an unsettling silence that seemed to swallow their nervous chatter. The air was thick with the smell of decay and dampness, and the floorboards creaked under their weight. They moved from room to room, the beam of their flashlight revealing tattered curtains, broken furniture, and walls covered in a thick layer of dust. In one of the rooms, they found a large, ornate mirror that was oddly pristine despite its surroundings. As they stared at their reflections, the temperature in the room seemed to drop even further. "Let's go upstairs," Jason suggested, eager to keep moving. The staircase groaned as they ascended, each step amplifying their growing unease. At the top of the stairs, they found a long corridor with several doors, each one closed. The last door on the left caught Claire's attention. It was slightly ajar, and a faint light flickered within. "Do you see that?" she whispered. The others nodded, their curiosity piqued. They approached the door cautiously and pushed it open. The room inside was dimly lit by a single candle placed on a dusty table. On the far wall, a portrait of a beautiful woman in a white dress hung crookedly. Her eyes seemed to follow them, and her expression was one of sorrow and longing. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them, and the candle was extinguished. Panic set in as they fumbled in the darkness, trying to find a way out. The temperature plummeted further, and they could see their breath misting in the air. A soft, mournful wail echoed through the room, and a ghostly figure began to materialize in front of the portrait. She was dressed in a flowing white gown, her hair cascading around her like a dark halo. Her eyes were hollow, and her mouth was twisted in a grimace of pain. "It's her!" Emily screamed, backing away. The woman in white floated towards them, her feet not touching the ground. Her presence was overwhelming, filling the room with an oppressive dread. She raised a skeletal hand and pointed at them, her voice a chilling whisper. "Why have you come here?" she asked, her voice echoing with centuries of sorrow. We just wanted to see if the stories were true," Daniel stammered, his bravery evaporating. The ghost's eyes flared with a sudden, malevolent intensity. "You have trespassed on sacred ground," she hissed. "Now, you must pay the price." Without warning, the ghost lunged at them, her form shifting from sorrowful to vengeful in an instant. The friends scattered, trying to escape her icy grip. Emily tripped over a broken chair and fell, her scream piercing the silence. Daniel and Jason managed to pull her to her feet, and they all bolted for the door. But the mansion seemed to warp around them, the corridors twisting and turning into a nightmarish labyrinth. The woman in white was always one step ahead, her laughter echoing through the halls. "There's no way out," Claire whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. "We're trapped." As they rounded a corner, they stumbled into a room filled with old, rusted medical equipment. Bloodstains covered the walls and floor, and a sense of overwhelming dread settled over them. In the center of the room was an operating table, and on it lay a decayed corpse dressed in a white gown. The corpse's eyes snapped open, and it began to twitch and convulse. The friends screamed in unison as the woman in white appeared beside the table, her eyes burning with fury. "This is where I died," she said, her voice a low, menacing growl. "Betrayed by those I loved, abandoned to suffer alone." The friends watched in horror as the corpse rose from the table, its limbs moving with a grotesque, jerky motion. It reached out towards them, and they backed away, their fear palpable. "Please, let us go," Jason begged, his voice cracking with terror. The woman in white shook her head. "You must share my pain," she said. "You must know what it feels like to be betrayed." The ghost raised her hands, and the room began to spin. The friends were thrown to the floor, their bodies racked with pain. Blood began to seep from their eyes, ears, and mouths, pulling on the surrounding floor. The woman in white began to chant in an ancient, forgotten language, her voice rising and falling in a rhythmic pattern. The blood on the floor started to move, forming intricate patterns and symbols that glowed with a sinister light. "We need to get out of here," Daniel gasped, his vision blurring. "We need to break the spell." Emily, barely conscious, reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver cross. She held it up, and the ghost recoiled, hissing in fury. "Keep it away from me," she shrieked, her form flickering like a dying flame. Seizing the opportunity, Jason grabbed the cross from Emily and thrust it towards the ghost. The woman in white screamed, her body writhing in agony as the light from the cross intensified. "Go, now," Jason yelled, pulling Emily to her feet. They stumbled towards the door, the mansion shaking violently around them. As they fled down the corridor, the walls began to close in, the floors buckling and splintering beneath their feet. The ghost's screams followed them, growing fainter as they reached the staircase. They tumbled down the stairs, their bodies battered and bruised. The front door was in sight, but the ghost appeared one last time, blocking their path. "You cannot escape me," she hissed, her voice filled with hatred. "You will die here, just like I did." With a final, desperate effort, Claire grabbed the cross from Jason and lunged at the ghost. The woman in white let out a blood-curdling scream as the cross touched her, and her form disintegrated into a cloud of black smoke. The friends burst through the front door and into the night, the mansion collapsing behind them in a cacophony of splintering wood and shattering glass. They didn't stop running until they reached the safety of the town, their hearts pounding and their bodies shaking with fear. They had survived the night, but the memory of the woman in white would haunt them forever. And as they looked back at the ruins of the mansion, they knew that some stories were better left untold. The days following their escape were a blur of sleepless nights and haunted memories. Daniel, Emily, Claire, and Jason tried to return to their normal lives, but the terror they experienced in the mansion clung to them like a dark shadow. Daniel found himself plagued by nightmares. Every night, he dreamed of the woman in white, her hollow eyes staring into his soul, her cold fingers gripping his throat. He woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, his heart racing. His friends were no better off. Emily, once the most spirited of the group, became withdrawn and jumpy, flinching at the slightest sound. Claire refused to speak about what had happened, her silence a stark contrast to her former chatter. Jason, always the brave one, started drinking heavily, trying to drown the memories that tormented him. One evening, as they sat together in Daniel's living room, the weight of their shared trauma hung heavy in the air. The TV flickered in the background, but none of them paid it any attention. "We need to talk about it," Emily said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "What's there to talk about?" Jason snapped, taking another swig of whiskey. "We barely made it out alive. End of story. But it's not the end, is it?" Claire said, her eyes fixed on the floor. "She's still there, in our minds. She won't let us go." Daniel nodded, understanding their unspoken fear. "We need to find a way to end this. For good." The friends knew they needed answers, and there was only one place they could go. They had to return to the mansion, not to face the ghost again, but to uncover the truth behind her tragic story. The local library, a dusty relic of a bygone era, held the town's historical records. If they were going to find any clues about the woman in white, they would find them there. They spent hours poring over old newspapers, diaries, and town records. Finally, Emily found an old journal that seemed to hold the key to the mystery. It belonged to a woman named Lillian Hargrave, the daughter of a wealthy family who once lived in the mansion. According to the journal, Lillian had been in love with a young man named Thomas. They planned to elope, but Lillian's parents discovered their plan and forbade the union. Desperate to be together, Lillian and Thomas made one last attempt to run away, but they were betrayed by Lillian's jealous sister, Margaret. Margaret lured Lillian to the mansion's attic, where she locked her in a room and left her to die. Thomas was ambushed and killed by hired thugs. Lillian's final entries were heartbreaking, filled with despair and longing for her lost love. The friends were horrified by the tale of betrayal and murder. It was clear that Lillian's spirit was trapped, bound to the mansion by her unresolved pain and anger. They realized that to free her, they needed to perform a ritual to lay her soul to rest. Armed with the knowledge from Lillian's journal, the friends prepared for their return to the mansion. They gathered items they believed would help: salt for protection, candles, and the silver cross that had repelled the ghost before. They also brought a copy of Lillian's journal, hoping to use her own words to reach her. The night was dark and cold as they approached the mansion once more. The ruins stood silent and foreboding, a stark reminder of the horrors they had faced. As they stepped through the broken doorway, the temperature dropped and an eerie silence enveloped them. They made their way to the attic, the place where Lillian had met her tragic end. The room was just as they had left it, filled with the remnants of her imprisonment. They arranged the candles in a circle and sprinkled the salt around the perimeter. The air was thick with tension as they began the ritual. "Lillian Hargrave," Emily called out, her voice steady. "We know your story. We know the pain you suffered. We are here to help you find peace." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a faint light appeared in the center of the circle, growing brighter and more defined. Lillian's ghostly form materialized, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Why have you returned?" she asked, her voice echoing with centuries of pain. "We're here to set you free," Daniel said, holding up the journal. "Your story deserves to be told, and your spirit deserves to rest." Lillian's eyes softened as she looked at the journal. She reached out a hand, and the journal floated towards her, opening to the last, tear-stained page. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." A sudden gust of wind blew through the attic, extinguishing the candles. The friends huddled together, fear gripping them once more. But this time, Lillian's presence was different, less vengeful, more sorrowful. "Lillian, we need you to forgive," Claire said, stepping forward. "Forgive yourself. Forgive Margaret. Let go of the pain." The ghost looked at them, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. She nodded slowly, her form beginning to fade. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me peace." As she vanished, the room warmed, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The friends felt an overwhelming sense of relief. They had done it. They had freed Lillian's tormented soul. The following morning, the sun rose over Ravensbrook, casting a warm light on the town. The fog that had shrouded the area for so long seemed to lift, and the air felt lighter. The friends gathered at Daniel's house, exhausted but relieved. "We did it," Emily said, a small smile playing on her lips. "She's finally at peace." "But what about us?" Jason asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "Will we ever be the same?" Claire shook her head. "We've been through something terrible, something that will stay with us. But we faced it together, and we survived. That counts for something." Daniel nodded in agreement. "We have to move forward, take this experience and use it to make us stronger." As they sat in silence, each lost in their thoughts, they knew that the scars of that night would never fully heal. But they had faced their fears and emerged on the other side. The legend of the woman in white would live on, but now it was a story of tragedy and redemption, of pain and forgiveness. And as they watched the sun rise, they felt a sense of hope. They had faced the darkness and found the light. And in that light, they found the strength to go on. As weeks turned into months, the friends gradually resumed their normal lives. The terror of their encounter with the woman in white became a haunting memory, one they seldom spoke of but could never fully forget. The mansion, now a ruin, was left untouched by the townspeople, who continued to regard it with a mix of fear and reverence. One crisp autumn day, Daniel, Emily, Claire, and Jason decided to visit the site of their ordeal one last time. They needed closure, a final act to put the past behind them and say goodbye to the woman they had freed. They brought flowers, a symbol of peace and remembrance, to place at the site. As they arrived at the mansion, they noticed that nature had begun to reclaim the land. Vines and wildflowers grew where walls once stood, and the air felt lighter, as if the very earth had exhaled a long-held breath. They walked through the remains of the front door and made their way to the attic, now open to the sky. Standing in the center of the room where Lillian's ghost had appeared, they placed the flowers in a small, makeshift memorial. Emily spoke softly, her voice carrying the weight of their collective emotions. "Lillian, we hope you found peace. We're sorry for the pain you endured, and we thank you for showing us the strength of the human spirit." The others nodded, each lost in their own thoughts. For a moment, the air seemed to shimmer, and they felt a gentle breeze, warm and comforting, brush against their faces. It was as if Lillian was acknowledging their farewell, a final gesture of gratitude. As they left the mansion, a sense of calm washed over them. They knew they had done all they could to honor Lillian's memory and help her find peace. The sun set in a blaze of colors, casting long shadows that seemed less menacing and more like old friends bidding them farewell. Years passed, and the friends remained close, their bond strengthened by the ordeal they had survived together. Daniel pursued his dream of becoming a writer, channeling his experiences into a novel that told the story of Lillian Hargrave, ensuring her story would never be forgotten. Emily found solace in helping others, becoming a counselor for those who had experienced trauma. Claire used her newfound resilience to become an advocate for historic preservation, ensuring that the past was remembered and respected. Jason, who had struggled the most with their ordeal, found peace in sobriety and used his story to inspire others facing their own demons. The town of Ravensbrook slowly shed its reputation for being haunted. The mansion, left to the elements, became a monument to the past, a place of quiet reflection rather than fear. People began to visit the ruins, leaving flowers and mementos, paying their respects to the woman whose tragic tale had touched so many lives. One bright spring day, Daniel returned to the mansion alone. He walked through the overgrown garden and into the remains of the house, now a serene and almost beautiful ruin. As he stood in the attic, he felt a sense of peace, a feeling that everything had come full circle. "Thank you, Lillian," he whispered, a gentle breeze ruffling his hair. He knew she had finally found her rest, and in doing so, had given him and his friends the strength to move forward. As Daniel left the mansion for the last time, he felt lighter, his heart filled with hope. The woman in white had become more than a ghost story. She had become a symbol of resilience and the enduring power of forgiveness. And in the quiet, sunlit ruins of Ravensbrook, her spirit finally rested, free at last.